So if you've ever watched my channel, you probably already know I don't do a lot of heavy videos. I like to keep things lighthearted and fun, but I had a few subscribers reach out and ask if I would ever consider doing a video about the LA riots. And even though it seemed like a really interesting idea, it just felt like it was too heavy of a topic for this channel. But the more I thought about it, the more it started to make sense, considering my channel is all about the 80s and 90s, and I do a lot of videos about Los Angeles because this is where I was born and raised, and the LA riots or the LA uprising were a huge part of Los Angeles in the 1990s. And considering this month marks the 30th anniversary of the LA riots, it seemed like the perfect time to make this video. So we'll be looking at the events that led up to the riots. We'll be checking out some of the key locations and seeing what they look like 30 years later. We'll be talking to a few different people and hearing what their experiences were. We got a lot to see, so let's go see what we can find. On March 3rd, 1991, the police attempted to stop a vehicle for speeding on the 210 freeway, and after nearly an 8-mile chase, the traffic stop finally ended right here behind me. At around 12:45 a.m., local resident George Holliday heard a commotion, so he grabbed his new video recorder and he headed out to his balcony. Mr. Holliday lived right here in this apartment building that's in front of me. So I'm not exactly sure which one of these balconies would have belonged to George Holliday, but that black fence going around the building, that can actually be seen a few times in the video. George Holliday kept his camera rolling while a group of LAPD officers used their batons and tasers on Rodney King for almost 2 minutes. On March 16th, 1991, just 13 days after the beating of Rodney King, 15-year-old Latasha Harlins walked into Empire Liquor, which used to be located right here in this building behind me. Harlins walked into Empire Liquor, grabbed a bottle of orange juice, stuck it in her backpack, and headed towards the counter with money in hand. As she approached the counter, owner Soon Ja-doo began accusing her of stealing and tried to take her backpack. A struggle began. It got slightly physical on both ends. Latasha eventually rustled away her backpack, picked up the bottle of orange juice and handed it back to Doo, and turned to walk out the front door. At which point, Soon Ja-doo reached under the counter and pulled out an illegally altered handgun and shot Harlins in the back of the head. On April 21st, 1992, Doo was found guilty of voluntary manslaughter, but the judge decided Doo was not a threat and she would receive no jail time. Soon Ja-doo only received 5 years probation, 400 hours of community service, and a $500 fine. This was the beginning of the Los Angeles riots. April 29th, 1992, people gathered at the Simi Valley Courthouse to await the verdict. Some who came to the courthouse were there in support of the police, others were not. This man is one of the people that came to the courthouse in support of the police. He sat on a bench near the main entrance, holding a box of donuts, waiting to pass it to the officers as they moved inside. As he sat on the bench, he had conversations with people who didn't share his same views. Officer Powell is given the donuts and he moves into the courthouse, receiving both criticism and cheers from the crowd outside. Officer Wynn nervously awaits the verdict outside of this courthouse entrance on the other side of the building. On April 29, 1992, just after 3 p.m., the judge would read a verdict that would change people's lives in Los Angeles forever. All 4 officers were found not guilty. Tension instantly began to rise in the parking lot outside of the courthouse.
He's cheering him on, man. There ain't no cheering here.
Shortly after the verdict was read, people began showing up to protest at Parker Center in downtown Los Angeles, which at the time was the headquarters of the LAPD. The LAPD stopped using Parker Center in 2009, and in 2019, the building was torn down. This is the intersection of Florence and Normandy, which was considered the epicenter of the LA riots. You've definitely seen this intersection in videos and pictures of the riots. Within a couple of hours of the verdict being read, people had come out to this intersection and they were throwing bottles and cans and rocks and pretty much anything they could find at cars that were passing by. They were pulling motorists out of their vehicles and beating them and setting things on fire. Within a couple of hours, this entire intersection had turned to complete chaos. Things actually began about a block north at the corner of 71st Street and Normandy. Police were responding to an incident and were quickly outnumbered. Dozens of LAPD officers responded, but the crowd continued to grow larger and larger, and the police eventually had to retreat. Once the police were completely out of sight, that's when people began to move about a block south to Florence and Normandy, and that's when things really started to get out of control. Hundreds of liquor stores were looted and burned during the riots, and Tom's Market at the corner of Florence and Normandy was one of the first and hardest hit. It's been said that all of the alcohol that was taken from Tom's Market definitely helped to fuel the violence. So this is it, right there in front of me. That's where Reginald Denny was pulled out of his truck, beaten, and left for dead. The media had no problem showing all of the violence and destruction, but very rarely did they talk about the heroes and the people doing good during the riots. 4 local residents sat at home and watched as Reginald Denny laid in the streets waiting to die, and they realized that something had to be done. So those 4 residents drove to the intersection of Florence and Normandy, put Reginald Denny back in his truck, and drove him to a local hospital. If it wasn't for Bobby Green, Titus Murphy, Terry Bennett, and Lee Yoli, Reginald Denny probably wouldn't be alive today. Just a couple hundred feet away from where Reginald Denny was beaten, Choi Sai-Choi was also stopped and beaten while his car was destroyed. Off-duty firefighter Donald Jones stepped in and stopped the beating, and a few moments later was told that he had about 1 minute to get out of the intersection. So Jones put Choi back in his car and drove him to the fire station. Again, if it wasn't for Jones, Choi may not be alive. This is the First African Methodist Church, and during the Los Angeles riots, Reverend Cecil Murray and his congregation took to the streets to plead for peace and to create human barriers between rioters and firefighters as they tried to put out blazing buildings in the neighborhood. First African Methodist Church also offered shelter to victims of the riots and helped to distribute food in the weeks to come. These are just a few of the heroes of the Los Angeles riots.
I was 22 and I was living in LA right in the middle of all the stuff that had happened. Well, a little north of South Central, but we called it Mid-City area. I lived about 2 blocks away, and my friend was driving by my shop and he says, "Hey, your shop's on fire." Walked out my door, I looked in the general direction of my shop and I saw this orange glow and I was like, oh man. And luckily it wasn't my shop, it was the shop next door to me, which was a liquor store, so obviously they were burning that. They had already looted that. Mine was gated up and it was still there, so I called up all my friends with trucks and I said, "Hey man, come and help me, we're gonna load up my stuff." You know, we had to have guns, so we all had our guns. We didn't have nobody on our roof like in the news reports, but you know, that was over there in Koreatown. We were a little north of that. And while we're loading up our stuff, my stuff, we had looters come in thinking that we're looting too, so they're loading it up too. My friend's mom She was like 80 at the time. She went up to this one big dude and just said, "Get out of here," with the gun in her hand. 80-year-old, and I just looked at her and I said, Mom, relax, relax. And so it started getting a little too wild, so I told all my friends, hey, let's get what we can and get the heck out. The fire department had come and put out the fire next door, so then I went back, but everything had smoke damage and everything was smelling and it had water damage and stuff, so I just said, oh, heck with it. Like 2 hours later, I see on the news, the whole city's just blowing up. We tried to get food. I mean, our lights were off and everything was off. And my sister and my brother-in-law lived out here in Orange County. They came out to help, brought food and stuff, but we didn't have electricity, so we couldn't use the microwave. So, you know, we tried to go out and eat, but everything was closed and everything was burned out. We were driving around and all the markets were all gone. We're just like, oh, great. We can't even survive out here now. When I got looted, all my good products that only martial artists would know about were stolen. All my cheap Taiwan, China stuff wasn't touched. So I hate to say it, it was my clients that robbed from me, and that really hurt me. And that's another thing with the, with the FEMA and trying to get grants and whatever. Everyone says, "Oh yeah, you must have made out." And I was like, I didn't make out. I didn't make out at all. First off, my insurance told me they wouldn't cover it because it's a riot. Okay, I had the fire. Will that cover it? No, because it was a part of the riots. Candidly told me just go sign up for FEMA and go get a grant. So I go down there and this line 2 blocks down the street to just get paperwork. So I get the paperwork. It takes me like 4.5 hours to get the paperwork. Get a call 2 weeks later. "Oh, you're not really destitute. You still have your house, and your mom and dad has money. So yeah, we're not going to give you the loan for a low interest loan. We'll give you a loan for 9%, 8 to 9%. I was like, I can get that anywhere. I was like,
Almost 4,000 fires were set during the Los Angeles riots, and this Pep Boys is just one of the many buildings that was set ablaze in late April of 1992. There was also more than 60 deaths from the Los Angeles riots, and inside that Pep Boys was one of them. The body that was found inside this Pep Boys was burned so bad that they were unable to identify it for 25 years. But finally, in 2017, they were able to identify the body as Miguel Ortiz, who would have been 18 years old at the time. So I would have been 12 at the time, and this is where I was living. Looks a bit different now. I remember watching the verdict on TV with my mom. I remember when they read the verdict, we both couldn't believe it, but I was 12, so, you know, as they started showing like what was happening at Florence and Normandy and, you know, around different parts of LA, I started kind of realizing that things were getting a little scary. And for some reason, I remember coming outside, and I don't know why, but I remember just kind of pacing back and forth right here. So my dad worked in the Boyle Heights, East LA area, and I remember thinking, you know, watching what was going on TV and seeing them pulling people out of their cars and beating them, and thinking that my dad was gonna have to drive through that to get home, and just feeling like he was gonna be one of those people. I was gonna see him on TV getting pulled out of his car. And so, yeah, I remember just pacing back and forth right here, having a sick feeling in my stomach. I think I was pacing back and forth, waiting to see, you know, his truck come around the corner and knowing that he was safe. Another thing I remember, I guess it would have been like on the third day, was we were driving right here down Victory, and as we passed by Reseda Park, I remember looking at this playground, and there was a family, like a mom pushing her kid on the swing, and then right there in the sand next to the playground, there was a National Guard soldier standing there holding his rifle. I don't really remember a lot of like looting and fires here in the valley. I remember, you know, maybe here and there seeing a business that had their windows broken out, but not like mass looting like you were seeing in other parts of LA. I remember driving right here with my dad down Sherman Way. It was like 7 o'clock in the evening, and the streets were dead. Like there were no cars, no people out because there was a curfew in effect. And that was really weird. Like, you know, obviously you don't ever see the streets like that in LA. That made everything feel worse. It made it feel like kind of like we were in an apocalypse or something, not seeing any cars or people out on the street. But yeah, for some reason I remember driving right here and telling my dad, like, what are we doing? We got to go back home. There's a curfew. I guess I thought that, you know, if you were out during a curfew, then you automatically would go to jail or something.
Are you embarrassed? Don't you know this is illegal?
I don't know because it's free.
If it's free?
Yeah.
Don't you know it's wrong?
Nah,
You don't care?
I don't care.
So right over there is where the footage was taken of the guy in the vest kind of freely firing his gun. But then right across the street is another building that looks like it's probably going to get torn down pretty soon. And there was a pretty famous picture taken on the rooftop of this building of a bunch of guys lined up on the roof with rifles. So what year was it that your family moved to the US?
We moved here in the summer of 1988. I believe it was June. And we got picked up by my aunt at LAX, and then she brought us over here to this apartment building because that's where my grandparents lived. So they lived on the first floor, in one of the units, and then we got to move into the second floor unit right up in that corner.
Okay, so just tell me a little bit about what you remember from living here during the riots.
So one of the things I remember was being told to keep all the lights off and to keep all the curtains closed and all the blinds closed. We didn't want to attract any attention. So it was dinner time, and I remember my aunt having to cook dinner in the dark with candles all around. All right, so this is my church, or was my church, in the 80s and 90s. And we thought that it caught on fire because we lived a couple blocks that way. So it turns out it wasn't on fire. The building over there, which I believe was a Circuit City, that was on fire.
So considering you were only 9 years old, how did you feel living in this area when all that was going on? Like, do you remember feeling scared, or did you kind of not really realize what was going on?
Both.
Okay.
So I was scared because we had a curfew. We couldn't leave our house. I was scared because we had to keep all the lights off and we couldn't stand by the windows. So we like sat on the ground. But then again, my parents kind of shielded us from seeing like the really, really bad stuff that was going on out here. Like, we didn't really have the news on. So I was kind of oblivious to everything, but I did know that the riots were going on.
And there was probably a lot of really bad stuff going on just like blocks from you, right?
Oh yes,
because
in all directions.
We're right in between Western and Vermont.
Yes,
Okay.
So there were fires, we can see fires everywhere. We can hear police sirens, yeah.
Okay, I was in here, I was living in Compton, California here, born in 80, so I was about 12 years old. Living in Compton right down the street here off of Bradfield and Palmer Street. So, yep, born and raised here. My cousin and I walked down the street right here actually. This was a different store. I think it was a Circle K, and it was pretty much people just running out with cash registers. This here was here behind us was on fire. It was just something crazy to see walking down the street here, and just seeing everybody just run around like crazy. I was a little nervous to go in the store to grab something, so I was sitting here and people were coming out with drinks and sodas and whatnot and gave us one. Because all stores wasn't looted, of course. Not every store was, but most were, and most were locked down at that time. And so all you heard was sirens, like you do now. I just remember like refrigerators on the back of El Caminos. That was weird, and the El Camino's actually dragging low with like multiple refrigerators on the back of it with all types of stuff. I don't know exactly what day, the 3rd or 4th, whatever, but I remember people were trying to say they're gonna go into the Compton swap meet, and that was, if you know about the Compton swap meet, it's located not too far from here, less than a mile. The Compton swap meet, that was where you go to buy your t-shirts, ice cream, from cookies to your CDs and tapes back in those days, and the actual National Guard was there, and it was full of just the whole parking lot was full of people as well as the National Guard. So they were saying, do not try to attempt to, break into here. Just helicopters up and a lot of just all kind of confusion going on. But I remember seeing that site too, and it was so many of it was like National Guards out with guns, and no one was entering the Compton swap meet. This is Bradfield, then you have Bullis. The next main street is Long Beach Boulevard. Right by Long Beach Boulevard, by Church's Chicken across the way, it was a pet store. And all that was looted, all that was burnt down actually, just like we are here. It was all burnt down and rebuilt. They actually have a McDonald's there now, which is on Rosecrans and Long Beach. That was all like mom and pop shops. So after riots, that whole thing was burned down. Everything was looted there, I remember. And they didn't never rebuild for many years. I think it's been about maybe 10 years or so that the McDonald's is there now. More Subway, things like that have came in. T-Mobile's over there. So it's kind of sad not to see that ever rebuild here in Compton. All the mom and pop shops, a lot of those was affected. And bigger establishments came in like McDonald's and Subway, and the bigger guys came and took advantage pretty much of the city. Growing up here, I was a little nervous, I would say, scared, thinking about it once I came home, to lay down and sleep at your house, but it was a lot of chaos going on. So of course I was a bit nervous just thinking about it, not sleeping well. You could see, so if you look around the whole city, just looking up in the sky, you can see a lot of smoke, a lot of, copters and helicopters, and it was a lot of chaos. You can still hear ambulance, sirens, and all that type of stuff for days. And so that was one of the things too, just hard to sleep, because even at nighttime, you hear the choppers chopping away. So just over the course of those 3 or 4 days, what have you, just hard to sleep. It was just different. So like, it was weird because you couldn't really go to a store, really. It was just like, people stayed at home at that time. I remember just talking to all my friends, so we were all on the street. We used to play football, basketball in the streets with the courts and things. So just coming back out, speaking with them about it and their experiences, and with their family members and friends and people that they knew that was in the riots, and all that stuff. It's, oh, I got this, I got some shirts, oh, I got some shoes. Some people had bikes, he had the Ataris, I think it was a Genesis then, maybe it was a Genesis and things like that.
So do you think the riots changed Los Angeles?
I feel personally it did kind of make a change. Brought more awareness, I would think, about what goes on with police brutality and all these other things that, both sides have different good and bad on both sides. But I think it brought worldwide, it brought recognition to the problem, the cities, and the inner city problems that goes on. So I do think, don't say it was a good thing per se, but I do think it brought recognition.
People were nicer to each other. For a minute, yeah.
It was really interesting to drive around and see how much all of those locations have changed, and I still can't believe it's been 30 years. That's gonna do it for this video. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.